Okay, then. A very good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining for the last and final session of our workshop series that's on manuscript writing. Um, we'll be beginning now. All right. So, in this session, we'll be discussing manuscript writing in general. We'll not be restricting ourselves only to original studies. I'll be giving a brief idea on how to write systematic reviews as well. All right. So, scientific writing in general, when you write any manuscript, it focuses on three key concepts. That's the three C's: content, clarity, and compliance. So so obviously you're doing a scientific writing for publishing in a journal. So when you're trying, when you're like first drafting the content, you should ideally have an idea of what journal you're aiming for, if their scope matches with yours, and what is their requirement for the writing to be as, like their requirement for the format. The most important thing is your research should read like a story. People should understand how you started, what were the exact procedures done. And I think I've mentioned this in a session before, that your methods has to be reproducible. So anyone else who's reading it, who has no idea about you, your lab, or your work, should be able to follow step by step of what you write and reach a similar conclusion in a similar population. So direct, simple, and clear style is very important, because you don't want to like beat around the bush. You want to be specific. You want to convey your story, your research in a way that people understand, comprehend, and it isn't very complex for them to understand as well. Editing style guide, everything should be according to the journal as well. Then the use of scientific terminologies. Actually, in our school, there's a way we learn how to write stories, how to write articles, and then you jump into medical school, where you would write long answer questions. So there's a certain way of writing, and then when you transition to manuscript writing, it's a different story altogether. You cannot emulate the ways you've written essays in your school before, or the way you're writing your long answer questions in your medical school, for the way of writing writing an article. So even if you're portraying a story, you cannot write it exactly like a story beating around the bush. It has to be specific, and there are certain terminologies that need to be followed. And for clarity, obviously the grammar, punctuation, everything should be as accurate as possible. It should be concise, obviously, and organization has to be maintained. There is a fixed organization that I'll be discussing in the next slides that needs to be followed, each term after the other, each section after the other, so that there's a proper flow maintained in the paper. And then finally, compliance. Obviously, you would comply to all the internationally accepted guidelines for writing a paper. You'd give your disclosures, any recommendations, or any disclosures in the sense conflicts of interest. If someone has funded you for doing the project, if like suppose if your company has discovered a new drug, for example, and you're testing that in a population. So obviously there will be people would expect there's a conflict of interest, since you're using the drug that your company has produced in order to give results, and there would be some kind of biasing that you want your results to be favored more. So that should be declared in conflicts of interest. Moving on. So types of manuscript. There are like tons of types of articles that you can find in the net. So there are the very short ones, like letter to the editor or commentaries, and there are very long ones like the original manuscript. So that depends on what exactly you want to address through your paper. Letter to the editor, and letter to the editor is basically you write like 500 to 600 word which consists of a couple of paragraphs, in which you're trying to bring something to the highlight of the journal, to the highlight of the scientific community. Suppose there's some new findings that you've noted in multiple papers consistently. So you write a letter to the editor saying that this is an issue which is being seen in multiple papers, and it is important that we highlight it through this article, so that other people in the scientific community get to know about this and they start doing their work on a specific topic. And then there are commentaries. So in commentaries, basically people may write a comment on an article published. So if there's some random article that's been published in a journal and you go through it, you find some inconsistencies there. Like say the methodology was incorrect. There was some sort of biasing. Some results have not been reported appropriately. So you highlight that while writing to the journal, saying that you're giving a comment on a certain article and saying that this is something wrong. This is something I find wrong, which is in their paper. So they forward that to the, they publish it obviously, and then they forward that to the original author so that they can address it. So that's like a crosstalk which goes on, facilitated by the journal between two group of people, and it's not necessarily negative. It can also be in a positive note, saying that this study has highlighted some important things and you want to like give more emphasis to that through the commentary. And then there would be review articles. Review articles, as you all know, it will be a compilation of all the published literature and like deriving something out of it. So say some original study has found some fact, and then there are a couple of studies which have reported the same thing. So you want to compile them all and give a different perspective on the issue. That is like the same as a narrative review. Then systematic review adds another aspect of quality assessment to it so that we can know how well the other studies were performed. And then there's meta-analysis, obviously, in which you'd compile all of them, get their results all together, and then like conclude if their findings are statistically significant or not. And then there are original articles, obviously, which follow the same cohort case control observational studies. And then there are trials which are published. So these are the literature which can be there. And I think I've summarized them all. Communication is, again, commentary. Then case report and case series, obviously, if you're in your hospital on a day-to-day basis and you see any anomaly, any anatomical anomaly, or a different approach to the conventional treatment that you followed in a specific patient, or the patient has a very atypical presentation, and this is something you want people to know that this disease can have this kind of presentation as well. Those are the perfect candidates for a case report. And case series is a series, is a number of these cases. So you get around, so you can do a review of the past 10 years, for example, of your hospital, and you get maybe 6 cases which have come, who have presented with a similar atypical presentation of any disease, and you want to highlight that. So that can be done in a case series. Reviews, as I said, it's a compilation of all the previously studied articles, and you're giving a new perspective on their findings. Book chapters, again, the books that you read are basically published in different, through different publishers like Elsevier's. And I've talked about the other types of studies as well. So when we are writing a manuscript, the format that we follow is IMRAD, or IMRAD. It's I for introduction, M for methods, RA is basically results, and discussion. And this IMRAD format is followed for all observational and RCTs and experimental studies. Basically, all original studies or primary studies follow IMRAD. It isn't necessary for a narrative review to follow IMRAD. It isn't necessary for a case report, for a letter to editor, for a commentary to follow IMRAD. Systematic reviews and meta-analysis do follow IMRAD criteria as well. So this was set by the ICMJ, which has given a number of guidelines on multiple aspects on how you're supposed to frame your research paper, how your references should be sorted, and obviously the IMRAD criteria. So what this exactly stands for. So your paper, in short, should have 4 broad sections in the body of the manuscript. That is introduction, method, results, and discussion. So introduction, this will summarize all the current state of knowledge, like the current literature which is being published on the introduction. Again, I'll tell you in the later slides how you should format it. But like in short, it should have all the previous literature which has been published on the paper, what is the gap in literature, and why you want to conduct this study, and what is the aim of this study. And methods, there's obviously a selection criteria for a study population, why you selected that, the inclusion and the exclusion criteria, the tests you did, the tools you used, if you administered any intervention, what was the dosage, how is it, if it's an RCT, then if it was randomized, if it was if there is some kind of bias, if it was like blinded or non-blinded. And then the endpoints, the primary and secondary objectives that you had of the study, the ethical considerations. If it's an original study, it should have the ethics number, and from whom exactly you took the like clearance of ethics, from your institute, or from the state or the country in general. And then a paragraph on the statistical analysis, that is the software you used, the effect size, and what exactly analysis you did for the study. Then there would be the results section. In this, you would only state, like monotonously state only the like the results, like the data you got. You'll tabulate it or put it in figures, but just state it. You would not try to like interpret it or give any information on why this result came to be. That is for a different section. Here you will just state what you got. You would use tables and figures here, and like in your methods you would have described the objectives point by point. Suppose you have one primary objective and three secondary objectives. Ideally your results should be following the same order. You'd first like give data on the baseline characteristics of the patients, and then you would report the results of those objectives in that manner itself. So objective number one, whatever it was, your results for that. Objective number two in your secondary objective, whatever that was, your results for that. So similarly, in that manner, it should follow that order itself. Then the discussion. Here, you would just first summarize all the findings you got in a short paragraph. After that, you would go into the detail of each result and try to compare literature and justify why the literature agrees with your findings and why certain studies may disagree with your findings. Everything in discussion here should be like, it's on a subjective basis, what the authors think, and taking the data from other studies, you'll try to justify why it was in accordance to your study. Maybe a similar population size or a similar intervention was given. And there may be some studies which may not agree with your results. And like commonly people would not try to include such kind of studies, but you should put them into your discussion and specify why they weren't in accordance to your studies. Maybe their population size was too small, or maybe they had some bias in their study that you want to highlight in yours. So you should always try to include both ends of the spectrum into your discussion and basically give ground to your results. And then you would summarize the strengths and limitations of the study, why you think your study was better, like there is a significant contribution to the scientific community, and what was the exact methodology or or any form in which that made your study to be better than the rest. And then the limitations, obviously, because everything cannot be addressed in a study. There are definitely some biasing, or if it's unblinded, that would itself be a limitation. So you should address that and try to say what you have done through any measures to try and reduce the effect of the limitation on your results as such. Okay, so this is like if you would go through any scientific, like any paper on how you write a paper, this is like the standard format they show, that is an hourglass model of writing your paper, in which your introduction starts like from a broader perspective. It narrows down to your subject in consideration. Then you address that topic through your methods, through your through your methods and your results. And then from the results, again, when you go to discussion, you again broaden the horizon. You start describing the other studies in the literature. So that's like, and then you like conclude your findings and the implication of the findings on patient care. So you start big, you focus on your topic, and then you again encompass all the literature present to give like to highlight any translational benefits to your study. Translational would mean how your findings could perhaps one day be used to improve healthcare. So title. The title is the most important thing, because this is the way people will find your paper. They'll see this title, they'll decide whether they want to read this paper or not. Title should ideally be between 10 to 15 words. You cannot have even like, suppose it's a big study and you're trying to inculcate around 6 to 7 objectives in your paper. Even so, you cannot have a title that big, because no one is going to read that big title. 10 to 15 words is kind of a standard which is followed. And normally journals, they have a limit of their title. They say that it cannot be more than say 100 or 120 characters, or number of letters, or number of words. They give a limit like that so that you know to stick to it. And so it's better to focus on the primary outcome of your study. The primary objective of the study should be somehow reflected in your title. And what people do is, obviously when you're starting the study, you have a title in mind. Then once you complete your study, go back again to the title and see if what the title was set earlier, is it truly representative of the paper? If it's not, then you're free to change the title. And this is something people do repetitively. That is, they complete the entire paper and then they change their title so that it suits the best to the paper. So even if you have the title from the beginning, it is something that you need to revise. Even if you know that it matches your paper, you need to revise the title again, see if it justifies your findings or what you've done in the study, and then like give it a go, like you proceed for publication. So if you can, Boris, if you can launch the first poll. Thank you. Yeah, so I have covered this in the protocol writing session already. So should the study design be included in the title? Boris, I'm not able to see the results. Yeah, I got it. Thank you. So I'm happy you all chose yes. The study design should be included in the title, especially if it's any original, like any primary studies, it has to be there. Like you'd put your title, whatever it is, impact of something on something, and then you'd put a colon, and you'd put a mixed method study, or a cohort study, or a case control study, or a randomized control trial. And for reviews, for systematic reviews and meta-analysis, it should be there. If you remember the previous session, I talked about the Prisma checklist. The first point in the checklist is whether systematic review and meta-analysis is written in your title or not. So that's for systematic reviews and meta-analysis, those specific words need to be there in your title. For narrative review, not necessarily. It can be anything. Same for letter to the editor or commentaries. In fact, for those studies, you'll find very fancy titles, like, with a question mark, very like casual title, and that's all right. But for systematic reviews, meta-analysis, and any primary studies, your title should contain your study design. If anyone has any doubts till now, please feel free to unmute yourselves or put it in the chat box. Okay, then. So I'll proceed. So after the title, what comes, like if you read a scientific paper, after the title you have the author names, and then comes the abstract. So abstract is again a summary of your entire study, not only the background of the study, but you will also summarize in brief in 2 to 3 lines your methods, your results. Mainly, you would focus on your abstract and the like the conclusion from the study. So why is it important? Is that uh, majorly, if you're medical students and you're trying to publish articles independently, you will be publishing mostly in closed access, because open access journals are those you can freely download the PDF of them, and you have all the entire study in your hands. But closed access publication is those where in PubMed you would see only the abstract, and then you cannot access the article as such, because it's like you need to pay for getting the article, or you need to you need to have some subscription of the journals. So if your abstract is good enough, if um, if your main results were conveyed through the abstract, there are two benefits. One, either people, when they read your abstract, they'll be so interested that they'll actually buy the article, or access it through subscription. And the second is, based on your abstract results itself, they find it so comprehensive and so meaningful that they include the findings of your studies anywhere in their paper, and they cite your paper. And citation is like the end result of publication. You want your paper to be cited, you want people to read your paper and to cite your paper. So when you're publishing in closed access, people can only see your title and your abstract. So abstract is the one that decides it all, whether your paper was good enough for someone to consider it into their publication. They want to cite your paper, or they want to read the entire paper. They find the results so interesting that they try and download it, and see exactly what you're talking about through your manuscript. So abstract should ideally focus more on the results, but you want to convey it in a way that people understand they get the entire gist of your manuscript. So again, abstract depends again on the journal requirements. They have their specific the name of the headings they need, whether it should be unstructured or structured, and the number of words included. So it's almost around 250 to 300. There are some journals who ask for abstracts within 100 or 150 words, some for 200 words. And structured and non-structured means, structured means you would ideally have it in background, method, results, and conclusion. Unstructured means you won't have these headings. You'll just cover all of it in a single paragraph. An unstructured abstract is usually seen for when you're publishing case reports or case series or reviews. Original studies, they usually have structured abstracts, but there are exceptions as well. So once your abstract is done, you come to keywords. Keywords is again something that is seen for both closed and open access journals. And some people feel keywords is just again a summary of their result. But keywords is something that helps to find your article again. If you remember my session on PubMed search strategy, I covered something called mesh terms, in which mesh highlights the broad heading, the main topic of your paper. So when you give these keywords, and if it's a PubMed index journals, PubMed takes these keywords, and if they are indexed mesh terms, then that gets included there. So if your term is gestational diabetes mellitus is the keyword, and it is a mesh term. So when someone else later searches gestational diabetes mellitus, your under mesh terms, your paper would be one of the many results they get. So when you're choosing your keywords, instead of just blindly choosing the keywords based on your manuscript or your title, you should ideally see if those words are indexed as mesh or not through the mesh website, which you can search online, mesh in PubMed. You should see if those keywords are indexed as mesh terms, and if they are, you should include those as mesh. And there are obviously some keywords which would not be mesh, and you can include them as well if you find it very important to highlight your result. But ideally, it should have a mix of mainly mesh terms and any custom ones that you are making for your study. So this again mainly helps to make your paper more searchable, so that anyone else who's wanting to get some information on this topic can find your paper very easily through keywords. If you can please put the poll 2 for us. Thank you. So this again I've covered in the protocol in the PubMed search strategy, which was on like we have multiple ways of finding articles. So what kind of modifier do we use in PubMed, which helps us to get the broad like any article which on a which focuses on a specific topic in general. Okay, I'm happy maximum of you voted for mesh. That's right. When we want something which focuses on a specific topic, that is, it's the main focus of that study, then we use mesh. When we use all fields, it's searching for that specific word anywhere in the study. So again, as an example, I gave that session as well, and I'll repeat it again. Is that suppose you're searching for just lung cancer, suppose, and you're giving it in all fields, then it'll search through articles which have lung cancer anywhere in their paper. And some papers may have just written the word there are various types of cancers which are present in the body, for example lung cancer, colon cancer, etc. So that will get that study as well, and that study may be on something else. It may not be focusing on lung cancer, and you don't want that kind of study. You want something which is focusing on like whose main topic in consideration is doing any intervention on lung cancer. So for that, you use mesh terms ideally. Okay. So next, introduction. Does anyone have any doubts till now? Okay, all right. So I'll proceed with intro. Intro is again, if you remember the hourglass model, we want to go to the bigger aspect, like through the entire literature, we want to condense it down and narrow it down to our topic in consideration. So introduction, it usually constitutes about 10 to 15% of the paper's word count, and it should generally be made of 4 paragraphs, the paragraphs which I'll be stating in the next slide. Again, it should focus on the 3 C's: context, content, and conclusion. Context in the sense why the information about the disease in general, and any pathophysiology or any mechanisms you want to highlight. The content in the sense the past literature on this study, and the conclusion that will cover your gap in literature and the aim of the study. So yeah, actually, the gap in literature is one of the most important parts of an introduction, because that's like giving the justification of why you're doing the study. So the 4 essential components which you need to focus on in 4 paragraphs. You can exceed 4 paragraphs, but this should be the gist of going from the first to the last. That is, first is epidemiology. That is, suppose you're doing on gestational diabetes mellitus, you would first talk about why it's such a global health concern. You'll give some numbers there, and these numbers, as I'd mentioned earlier in the proposal session, that these numbers you should ideally get from GBD studies, from GBD studies, that is Global Burden of Disease. Global Burden of Disease is an organization which publishes international data every 2 years or so. So if you cite the numbers from there, it is covering, it has like, the numbers have more meaning to them because it's on the entire population of the world. So ideally, you should go for GBD studies if you want to get an international number. If you're not wanting that and you want specific national numbers, then you have national surveys which are conducted in India, like NHFS data. And like basically, the data from which you're getting your epidemiology numbers should be the primary study itself. If the primary study has been conducted, there is a review which is again stating the same number from there. Suppose 60% was the prevalence, and there is another review article which is stating the same number in it, that 60% is the prevalence. You cannot cite the review article and say that this study is saying 60%. No, you'll have to go to the original source, the actual study which conducted the worldwide or national survey and found the incidence or prevalence number, and from that study you will have to cite it. So epidemiology, again, it will cover the morbidity, the mortality, the incidence of the disease, and you'll basically highlight why this disease is such a big concern. Then you'll go into existing literature or the mechanisms. If there is no existing literature, suppose on the paper, you're doing any novel thing, then maybe you could focus on the interaction between the two variables. If there is any animal studies or if there is any cell-based studies, which is justifying some form of interaction between, suppose, a drug or a receptor and the disease itself. And existing literature, obviously, if there is already published papers on the correlation or association between two variables, you can highlight that, saying the study by X et al. Found, or whatever their conclusion was. You do not have to state the entire results from their paper, but basically give a gist of what they found in a single sentence, and then you would proceed. Basically give a story on what the literature says about this topic in general. After that, you'll come into the gaps in literature. Again, as I mentioned earlier, people sometimes do write that this study has not been conducted in this population, hence I'm doing this study. And early level researchers, it's all right to write, it's not an issue. But when you're going into peer review, this is something, and especially if you're aiming for a very high impact journals, this is something which is frowned upon. This is not a justification to the study that this is not done in this literature, hence I want to do it. It's not wrong to use, but you should not use it, especially if like you're going higher and higher in your impact you want to give through your paper. Any other justification could be there. For example, there's very inconclusive evidence, or there's evidence like there is evidence for the association, there's evidence against the association. So it's not basically agreeing on a specific term. Hence, you want to add to the literature saying whether such association exists or not. So that will be the gap. And then you'll go to the aim of the study, basically highlighting your primary objectives. Then you go to methodology. So methodology is the backbone of the study, in which you would specify about everything that you do step by step. You do not want to hide any fact here, from the IEC approval to the patient recruitment, from where you recruited them, how you recruited them, inclusion and exclusion criteria, then what you did with those patients, you gave some intervention, or you observed them, or you took their interview, and then you did some, then you got some data, then you did the analysis on the data. So just go like a story again. You'd start from the beginning, how you recruited the patients, till the end, how you did your analysis. So essentially, it should contain these headings. It should be around 30 to 40% of the manuscript. People often write their methods really short, and methods is one of the most common sections for which papers either get editorial rejection or peer review rejection, because their methods wasn't extensive enough, because they did not properly state every fact that they did. If the methods aren't reproducible, again, that is, if any other person who doesn't know you, who wants to do the study again, should be able to follow each and every step that you did and reach to a similar conclusion. So this is the headings. Study setting, where you did, suppose recruitment from the OBG OPD department. A study design. This is a cross-sectional study, or a mixed method study, or a cohort study, or an RCT. If it's an RCT, then you'd state how you did the blinding, that is, or the allocation of the sequence allocation, or how you did the randomization, that is maybe by computer methods or by envelope methods. Then you would go to sample size and sample size calculation. As I highlighted in the previous session, you'd use OpenEPI, for example, for sample size calculation. And if you are able to exceed that sample size through your recruitment, that's well and good. The sampling technique that you used. Then your ethical approval, from whom you got the IEC approval, from your institute, from the state, from the country, suppose if you're doing a nationwide study. Then the recruitment methods, how did you recruit, your consent form, and the experimental and interventional details. Suppose you gave any intervention, the amount of the drug, the route of administration, the frequency of administration, and then you'd go into statistical analysis. If it's a review, systematic review or meta-analysis, then you would summarize how you did your literature search, how you designed your search strategy, how you did your screening, your quality assessment, data extraction, and that's all. And you would end with data extraction, and then statistical analysis is the most important part, the last part, in which you would specify um, what kind of software you used, what kind of effects model you used, if you got your data in mean SD or you got your data in a number in percentage. All that data should be there in statistical analysis. Finally, after methods, it's the results section. Here, you want to state all the data that you got and the statistical analysis, the analysis that you did, and what numbers you got from that analysis. So it should be, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, in accordance to the objectives of the study. So the objectives that you state, suppose 4 objectives, in that order, you should report your results. Results should ideally be in past tense without any interpretation. So this was found. This prevalence was observed. This kind of association was seen. You do not want to state it in present tense. It's always past tense, and no interpretation. You do not want to justify your findings or why this number came to be in your results section. Then it's always better to give your results in forms of tables and figures, because it's something which you've also observed in your daily life. If you're reading any book, your course book, any book in your studies, then you'd obviously prefer to see figures explaining it or tables explaining it. You do not want to read through an entire paragraph monotonously that this was the percentage, this was the prevalence. It's always better to give it in figures or tables. Now, one common mistake people make while writing the results and making their tables and figures is that they make a table, and whatever data is there in the table, they again specify it in the text. See, when you put, like, giving results, there are 3 methods of giving those results: text, tabular, figures. You do not want to repeat the same information 3 times through figures, through tables, and through text. Once is enough. If you have the table, just say that table 1 states the baseline characteristics of the population. If you're doing an intervention study and it's group A and group B, then you'll state these like just a simple line that mean age of this much was seen in group A and group B, and no significant differences between baseline differences was noted between the 2 groups. You do not want to again summarize each and every point. 1 or 2 points stating is all right, but you do not want to copy paste the entire table into text form and basically giving the same information twice. Then why did you make the table? So repetition should be completely avoided. Then positioning and citation of the tables and figures is very important. That is, you would give table 1, there has to be a title of the table, and if you've used any short forms in your tables, like any short form like GDM, for example, then you would mention at the end of the table GDM colon and the full form of the term, and any footnotes if needed. Like suppose a value is mentioned in, suppose you've given a value is 3.3 and in brackets it's 2, and you know that this is basically mean and the bracket is SD. So you just put a footnote on that is put a star mark there, and later and below the table you just mentioned it that the value was measured in mean and standard deviation. Figures, again, that will be the name and number of the figure, like figure 1, then colon, the title of the figure, and then some explanation of that figure, that suppose it's a box plot, or suppose it has some colors in it, you want to specify blue stands for something and red stands for something, then you can mention that, just explain it briefly in the caption following the right title of the figure. So results section should always carry clear descriptive and inferential statistics in tables or figures. So statistics ideally should be always given in figures or tables maximum. Because if you're stating p-value a number of times in your text, it doesn't really make sense. People will not understand what kind of analysis you've done unless you give them in tables or figures. So results, when you're writing the results, demographic data of the study participants is the most important thing, because especially if you're doing a group A versus group B study, then you want to make it sure to the readers that these two groups weren't that different. So if you're giving any intervention, if the groups are vastly different, then that again introduces a bias. Baseline characteristics, even if it's not group A versus group A, it's a single group, baseline details should form the first paragraph of your results section. Then the second paragraph should contain details on the based on the objectives. Again, objective 1, 2, 3, 4. In that method, only you will state your results. And then the last paragraph should and then at the end you'll just like give the results in general, and then and that's it, you'll conclude there. And discussion of the results, again, as mentioned before, should not be done. Uh, if Boris, if you can launch the third poll. Okay, so we haven't started with discussion yet, but in short, I just mentioned it earlier. If there is any study which is opposing your results completely, that you're saying there's an association and there's a study before which says there's no association at all, then should you include this, cite this thing in your discussion? Should you discuss this further? Yes or no? Okay, great. Then I'm happy every one of you chose yes. I'll be describing it further in the next slides. But yes, you should include, state every, any kind of results. It can be agreeing with your findings, it can be disagreeing with your findings, but ideally you should state them and then give a justification for both. The people often, even if they give include both the agreeing literature and the literature which is disagreeing with them, they often give justification only for those studies which were opposing their findings. Ideally you should be doing for both, for why a certain study is in accordance with your findings and why a certain study was against it. Okay, so the main purpose of the discussion is to fill the gap which was identified in your introduction. You remember the third paragraph in introduction. In introduction, again, I'll summarize it was 4 paragraphs. The first was epidemiology. The second is existing literature the existing literature. The third will be the gap in literature, and the fourth is the aim of the study. So your gap in literature, which you mentioned in the intro, you want to address that in your discussion. Basically say that how this filled, like not explicitly state that the gap in literature was filled by this study, but basically, that should be the subtlety behind your paper, that whatever you addressed in the beginning, you're giving the answers to those questions. So again, discussion ideally should be in the format of your results. You had result A, you'd mention result A, specify the literature based on that result, see if they're agreeing or not, why, and all those stuff. Then you would again go to result B, you'll specify regarding that, then you'll go. So it should be in that order, in short. So again, the comparison can be concordant or discordant, but it should be this kind of agreeing and disagreeing literature will help to highlight the importance of your study. So care should be taken to not cover up any deviant results which do not gel with the current literature. If you have any result in your study, even if almost all the studies are against it, it's better you include them, because perhaps later on your findings can be seen in different other studies as well. Maybe those findings can be enforced more. So essentially 20% of the word count and consists of 5 to 8 paragraphs. The first paragraph should be highlighting the key results of the study. So your entire results section, you will be summarizing it in a single paragraph. And most importantly, you should not try to avoid numbers in your first paragraph. Just say there was an association seen, this was observed, but you do not want to specify numbers in your first paragraph of discussion. You just want to say these were the results of this study, but not the numbers. The second paragraph should like just highlight the briefly just highlight the importance of your study, and then you'll go into the relationship with other studies. So result number one, whatever you found, you'll write that in a single sentence. Then you would go by a similar result was seen in the study by X et al, which noted, um, for example, a prevalence of X percentage, if you're doing a cross-sectional study and if you're highlighting the prevalence of something. And the findings of our study were reinforced by this by Y et al or Z et al due to a similar population in consideration, for example. And then you would also give studies which were not agreeing with your literature, maybe because they were conducted in a different population, in a different state, like in a different location, or suppose you're doing in medical students, they are doing it in doctors, or they haven't specified their population, they're just doing it on entire medical fraternity. Then that could be perhaps a justification of why your results were not similar to them. Then your penultimate paragraph, that is the last but one paragraph, should highlight the strengths and limitations of the study. Your strengths, rigorous methodology was followed, or any new thing that you did in your study which was not previously done before. Suppose you did a subgroup analysis, if it's a meta-analysis, then you can highlight that. And any limitations of your study, if any biasing was there, if it was unblinded, then you can highlight that in your limitations. In your final paragraph, like people sometimes put conclusion into their discussion itself as the last paragraph. Sometimes they include it as a separate paragraph. But essentially, the last part of the discussion should be a take-home message of the study. So a conclusion of all your findings, and what kind of future research can be done on this topic in general to either strengthen your results or to get more evidence of a certain phenomena. So that can be highlighted in future research. And future research, you should ideally specify what kind of study you need, what kind of association they need to do, and what study design they need to follow. You cannot just say future research should focus on finding more evidence. You can say a diverse, like a trial needs to be conducted in this topic with a diverse population following a rigorous methodology, so that so and so results evidence can be obtained. So this is again the format of your discussion. First, you would highlight your key findings, your main major results or your findings. Second would be the interpretation, the like the results, and the past literature on it, if it's agreeing or disagreeing. Then you would state your strengths of your study. Then you would acknowledge the limitations of your study, and finally the recommendations. If it's a new finding, then any recommendations of future research, and again, give concrete ideas for future research, just not a generic sentence that future research should focus on this. Give the study design, give the kind of intervention they should be doing when someone else is, like, reading your paper and then deciding that they want to conduct a new study. They should have a clear idea on what exactly should be done. And then finally, the conclusion. So this is the last part. Sometimes people include it in as a part of their discussion. Sometimes they keep it separate. But this again is the take-home message. You'll summarize what your results was, what your thoughts are, and what implications they have on medicine, on clinical practice, and some future perspectives on what new studies should be done, and and what can be done basically to integrate this finding into routine clinical practice. And then references. Before I discuss about references, does anyone have any doubt in the basic sections of the manuscript in general? Okay, I guess not. So we'll be going into references. references, like formatting the references, first citation of the references is the most important part, because you want to be as ethical as possible. You want to follow all the guidelines which is given, and which is, if you're getting any data from any other study, you need to cite it. And citation is done via references. So you put a citation. You would have seen in papers there's a small number one, number two, as a superscript, or just in brackets, or the name of the something X et al. Would be written in brackets. So that's basically citing the study. And at the end of the study, you'll see the name of the authors, the study name, the journal published, and the date. So that's like a basic format of references. References should be in accordance to the journal guidelines. So there's a number of citation styles which are there: APA, AMA, NLM, and this frankly depends on your journal, the journal you're choosing. um, Ideally around 50 like references should be all right. There are some journals which keep a limit on the number of references they allow. Honestly, you'll have to see more into what the journal needs to decide the style and the number of permitted references. So this is again just giving you an overview of how different reference like citation styles are different on their own. No one is telling you to remember them, but you just have to know what a journal wants, what kind of citation style they want, and just put it in a software. Put it in a software, which I'll be showing in the next slide. The names of the software. Just put it there, and they'll help you give an automated result of the citation in that specific format. I think the most commonly followed citation style is Vancouver. Even if you're giving these STS projects or any basically ICMR projects, they always ask for Vancouver. So that's the most commonly followed. But again, look into your journal guidelines. Zotero and Mendeley, these are the standard ones, standard reference managers, which ease your work greatly. You can download them, integrate it into your Word, into Microsoft Word, and whenever you're typing your entire section, you can just use that to automatically cite your the articles in consideration. Scribr, like it helps you to generate the style. It is not integrated into Word as such, but if you put the DOI of the paper or the URL of the paper, it converts it into the style you want and just gives it, so you can copy paste from there. So formatting and organizing. This is something which is again completely dependent on your journal in consideration. They have their submission checklist. If you basically you go to a journal, you go to their instructions for authors or submission guidelines for authors, and there you will find the entire list, the submission checklist of what they want. In general, it should have the cover letter, authorship file, basically the you should have the authors, their affiliation, and the orchid. Orchid is basically what do you call a repository of all the authors. So you register there, just put in your details there. So later when you publish your articles, if you put your orchid, they can directly associate you to that person. There may be a number of people known by your name. Orchid can help you just compile all your research work in one place. Then there's the title page. That again depends on how your journal wants. Some journals, they ask only for the title, the names of the authors, and their affiliation. Some ask to put their abstract there. Some ask for author contributions. So that should be prepared accordingly. The blinded main manuscript, especially if a journal is following blinding for review, that is, the reviewers don't know you. They'll just see your paper, your content, and decide if they want to go ahead with publication or not. So that's called blinding. But basically, for blinding to be maintained, your main manuscript should not have any of your author details. The tables, again, as a separate file. Usually a Word file is necessary. Then the figures should be in high quality format, in JPG, in TIFF format. And the supplementary files. Suppose if it's a systematic review or meta-analysis, your supplementary file ideally would be the search strategy that you followed, the quality assessment results, And if it's an original study, maybe the raw data that you got from the patients, or the ethical clearance form, or the ethical clearance, or any form of appendix for that matter. If there is any result that you want to just keep it in supplementary files, then you can do that. Okay. So yeah, this is I'll be just going through a paper with you to summarize all that I have discussed, how they have mentioned their findings, like, following the exact format that we did in intro methods, results in discussion. Let me just share that one second. Okay, just if you can just zoom in into the paper, just so that you can see it properly. Um, I don't know. Okay, maybe this is better. Okay, so this is a paper that I found in JAMA. It's like one of the most prestigious journals. So this is on maternal purchases immunization and immunoglobulin G levels in early to late term and preterm infants. If you see here, they haven't mentioned their study design, but ideally you should be mentioning it. Like it's a standard. Then they have their the authors list here. Then the abstract. Actually, the abstract of JAMA articles are usually very different from abstracts of other journals, any other standard journals. That's their requirement. But it's the same thing basically. Importance would be the background that you would write in a different journal. So they've highlighted the topic and what the data says on this study. Then they've specified their objective, the design and setting, and the participants. Like, this is a cohort study, the inclusion criteria, and from the which date to which date they conducted their study. Then the intervention that they gave, the exposure that they highlighted, the outcomes or the measures that they did, and finally the results and the conclusion. So this is actually a really huge abstract. Normally you would not be allowed to write these many number of words. This is JAMA. They have a different method of writing the abstract, so that's all right. Usually you would have to conclude it within 250, 300 words maximum. So introduction. If you see the first paragraph here, they have highlighted the numbers. They have cited WHO, which is like uh, a standard way of getting their number. They state 81% of the infants worldwide had gotten doses of DPT. And then they've highlighted the problem here. It purchases remains endemic in many countries. Then newborns and infants are high risk with severe complications. So this is again the epidemiology part. Yeah, and then here they've given in the second paragraph, they've highlighted the past literature, or the methodology of the studies. What exactly is being done on this? That during pregnancy, here they've highlighted mainly the methodology. That IgG antibodies are secreted from the placenta, and then then 30 to 36 weeks of gestation, there's increase in fetal IgG levels. And then finally here, from there is no consensus, they have highlighted the past literature as well as presented the gap in literature. So they have highlighted there's no consensus on the optimal timing of maternal Tdap vaccination. Then they've highlighted the past literature, which suggests that it should be given early in the third trimester, whereas in a different study, they have specified for second trimester administration. Okay. And then this is basically something that they noted, that these studies had insufficient power to draw firm conclusions. So that is the gap in literature, that there is no firm conclusion on the optimal timing of Tdap vaccination. So in this study, this is their aim and study, the last paragraph. This basically specifies all the aims they want, the objectives of their study. Then you go to methods. Methods, as I specified, it should ideally have those headings that I gave in those slide as a subheading of methods. The study participants, they summarize all the study participants and how they obtained consent, from when to when their recruitment was done, who was their patient in consideration. Then they described about the vaccine, the intervention, like the vaccine and the dose of the vaccine. Then the how sampling was done, how the lab analysis was done, and mainly how the statistical analysis was done. Then the results. So I mentioned earlier that your results first paragraph should have the demography, baseline demography. So they've mentioned the baseline demography that there was 148 term infants, there was 91 preterm, the male, female. Then the gestational age was not significantly different between the study groups. And then they just state their findings. At 2 months, the TDAP was given and how much dosage was given. Okay, so this is basically all the results based on their objectives. And then the discussion. So the discussion here, the first paragraph, they state their findings. They observed a reduction in anti-PRN antibody levels. The anti-PT levels in umbilical cord are correlated with protection against pertussis. So again, if you see here, there isn't much numbers. They're just in general saying. They're not exactly citing the exact numbers that they got in their results. Then from here, they've started comparing the results with past literature. Many studies have suggested that Tdap vaccination results in maximum pertussis antibody levels. This is again all the results and their justification, the past literature which is being performed. And then this is notably the number of preterm offspring included in that study was too small to draw a conclusion. This is again, this suggests that they have compared some previous literature and they're just giving the justification that it was too small to draw conclusions. Yeah, so in the study from Belgium, in the UK, something was observed. So all the past literature is summarized here. Then they have a small subheading of limitations. Limitations, they've highlighted that term offsprings were recruited during different periods, and this study was performed during COVID time. Then vaccination history, they've highlighted the different limitations they had of this study. And then they did not study the antibody response to Tdap vaccination. Okay, and then finally they go for conclusion, in which they summarize their results, and then they specify that further epidemiological research needs to be conducted to determine whether Tdap vaccination before 20 weeks provides sufficient protection or not. So this in general, I've just discussed the entire study and summarized whatever we discussed in this session today. And yeah, that should bring us to the end of today's session. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. Does anyone have any doubts or any clarification you want to ask? The post-event questionnaire has been posted in the chat box. Please make sure to fill that up.
Hi, I had a few questions, if you don't
Yes.
mind. Yeah, one of the questions was when you said like a lot of data, it's better off to present it in results in terms of figures. What kind of data presentation methods are considered most professional for these kinds of papers? Do we just stick to the standard like pie charts and bar graphs and histograms, or is there anything that is considered better or worse off in this case?
Okay. All right. So data actually, how would you say? Your data decides your figure. Your figure doesn't decide your data.
Yeah.
Whatever data you have, on the basis of that, you decide the figure that is needed, if it's appropriate for that presentation of that data. Pie charts, bar graphs, you generate from Excel, that's all right. For for statistical analysis data, it is mostly not represented. Like it usually goes for box whisker plots or scatter plots. Basically, your data can be anything if it's appropriate for the your figure can be anything basically if it's appropriate for the data in question. Yeah, so for example, you cannot use scatter plots for qualitative analysis, qualitative data. So there isn't anything specific on what is more professional or not. Obviously, you'll come to a stage in your research career where you will not be using Excel to generate plots because it isn't really, I don't know, seen favorably. But for now, yeah, I think any figure can be used as long as it's appropriate for the data set in question.
All right. Also, in terms of gaps in research that decide what kind of research that we perform, if there is a well-conducted study, say outside of India,
Okay.
conducting the same methodology on an Indian subcontinent, on an Indian population, is that considered an adequate data gap, or are we just replicating the same study here?
Okay, so as I said before, writing that a certain thing has not been conducted in your population, hence you want to do, hence you want to do a specific research, isn't very ideal and isn't very happily accepted by peer reviewers. They'll nitpick that. They'll say this isn't a justification. They'll ask you 100 questions that you'll have to justify. But it's better if you can find any different gap in research, like if there is say an article, the same thing has been conducted in Netherlands and they found something, and then there's something in US which is entirely different of that thing. And actually studies like these, you'll find discordant data like that, something which has been done and something else which does not agree on that. Ideally you should not be stating that it hasn't been done in India, hence I'm doing it. But if like that's the only gap, then you'll have to. But yeah.
Sure. I just
Yeah.
wanted to look into it. That's it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else? Okay, then I think we can wrap today's session. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope you all were able to learn something through our 12 series, our workshop series. And maybe we'll launch this again next year, but this is all for this year. Thank you so much again. And I know some of your profs are going on, but still you've joined, so thank you for that. And have a nice year ahead. And